You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, I want to direct your attention to a few stunning new quotes from the jurors in the Georgia case, the Fulton County case against Donald Trump, and that was in the Georgia Journal Constitution. One juror said, quote, "I tell my wife, if every person in America knew every single word of information that we know, this country would not be divided as it is right now." And finally, here's the kicker here. A lot's going to come out sooner or later, and it's going to be massive. It's going to be massive. In your professional opinion, is this the kind of language used if an exoneration is in the works?
Yeah, I think it unlikely the jurors were talking about a massive exoneration of Donald
Yeah,
Trump because the grand jury believes he's done nothing wrong. I'll
right.
tell you, this is both really ominous for Trump and his criminal associates, and it's also a really good read. I hope everybody will read the Atlanta Journal Constitution article because rarely do you get this kind of insight into what was going on in the grand jury. I, as a prosecutor, got to see the inside of the grand jury all the time, but rarely does the general public get to see it. And when these grand jurors are talking about just how powerful the evidence is, how upsetting the evidence is, multiple grand jurors said they would sit in their cars at the end of the day and cry. Why would they cry? Because of what some of these people who were being investigated, presumably Trump and company, were doing to everyday citizens, to people like Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman,
Yeah.
the election workers in Georgia, who were not only vilified, but they had their lives threatened because Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani lied about them, claiming they're, stealing Trump votes, which was absolutely absurd. I mean, you could tell by reading this really deep dive piece that these grand jurors, took their work deadly seriously. They were really, I think, impacted by what they were seeing. And, there's another quote in the article that they said, it was incredibly important to us to get this right. And when they close out the article with one of the grand jurors saying, what's about to come is going to be massive. It's going to be massive. I'm starting to believe, Brian, that we're likely to see a big old RICO conspiracy indictment, not just sort of a series of more discrete standalone indictments of individuals. I think that's reinforced by what we heard from the forewoman, Emily Kors, when she said, look, you can expect to see more than a dozen people charged in this case. So I think we're going to see a big old conspiracy indictment issued by the grand jury after Fani Willis is done her work.
Yeah, and just to build on what you said earlier about Shay Moss and the whole issue with the elections workers, that part, I remember that was the one part of the hearings that really just kind of broke my heart because these are just people who are not only haven't done anything wrong, but actually are doing their civic duty, are making our elections run. And just for the crime of being there, it really is amazing to see what Donald Trump and the rest of his acolytes, like what they will torch in their quest to just gain power and whose lives they will just run roughshod over and how many just completely innocent people's lives were turned upside down just for this fairy tale that he was trying to concoct with the help of these people who just don't have any scruples, any shame, and who deserve everything that's coming to them. Glenn, there was one other quote that I just want to reiterate here, and that is, if everyone knew every word of information that we know, this country wouldn't be so divided. Now, that line from a juror in the Georgia case suggests that one of the two sides of the political spectrum is being lied to. I don't think that we have to sit here and pretend to not know which side that is. What were your thoughts on that line in particular?
Yeah, it was a very telling line. And I think what the grand juror was communicating is there's the truth, and they got a whole lot of evidence that was truthful and honest and accurate. And then there were a bunch of lies. And they actually put the witnesses that they saw in three batches. They put the truth-telling witnesses. They put a second category of witnesses who really didn't want to be there. They needed a subpoena to compel their testimony. But once they got there, they told the truth, even if reluctantly. And then the third batch were the people who were most closely aligned to Donald Trump, who were unwilling to tell the truth or who would just invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. it's pretty clear that the grand jurors were kind of signaling that if everybody could just see the truth and see the lies, then maybe, that would move the needle. Maybe there would only be one view of what really happened. Now, I would hasten to add that might be a little naive because there are probably some hardcore Trump supporters who are never going to be moved by the truth. But I mean, I thought it was a pretty telling comment by the grand juror.
And just one more point on this. You'd mentioned that it was so surprising that we're getting this kind of insight, from out a 30,000-foot view, that we're getting this kind of insight into the grand jury. Why are we getting this insight? Why is this something that we wouldn't normally see, and yet why are we getting this insight now?
So most jurisdictions have rules, and those rules involve grand jurors not being permitted to ever talk about what went on inside the grand jury unless there was a special order from the judge permitting them to speak. In Georgia, the rules are very different. In Georgia, you can speak about anything that happened inside the grand jury. The only thing you cannot discuss publicly are your deliberations, when it's just the grand jurors privately discussing what the evidence means, who should be indicted, but everything else is fair game. Who testified, what they said. And it's funny because the judge also made clear that they could talk about their recommendations in their report. Interestingly, none of the grand jurors who have given interviews to the media has been willing to talk about precisely what's in the report or who they recommended should be indicted. So they're kind of editing themselves and actually holding back, not necessarily disclosing everything. Under the rules of Georgia, they're permitted to disclose.
Yeah, and I guess we don't really have to. I mean, we already know that Fani Willis is releasing her decision about whether or not to indict imminently. So I guess at this point, it really doesn't matter because we'll find out that information soon enough. But it is important to note that they have stayed within the confines of the rules that are being imposed on them. Not to bury the lead here, there is another case that is racing toward indictment. That's the Manhattan District Attorney case about hush money payouts paid to Stormy Daniels. Stormy Daniels has now confirmed that she met with Manhattan prosecutors investigating Trump's hush money payouts. What does this signal? And also, why is this happening so late in the process? Shouldn't she have been interviewed like among the first people who were brought in?
It's a great question, and it's one that I can't quite answer. But let me start by saying, if what is going to happen in Georgia, according to the grand jurors, is going to be massive, it looks like what's going to happen in New York is going to be modest. It's going to be a more modest set of charges. The fact that Michael Cohen, arguably the most important witness in the hush money payments case, because he is a co-conspirator of Donald Trump, he committed the crimes at the direction of and for the benefit of Donald Trump. So he's undeniably the most important, most valuable witness, and he has now completed his testimony after 2 days of testifying before the grand jury. That signaled that the prosecutors are pretty much at the end of the grand jury investigation. The Stormy Daniels piece is interesting. She actually is a less central witness than you might otherwise expect, because it's really all about what Michael Cohen and Donald Trump together conspired to do to make these payments to Stormy Daniels. So I actually would have expected the prosecutors to have met with Stormy Daniels long ago and probably to have presented her to the grand jury. Why? Well, if we think we're going to call a witness at trial, we definitely want to put them before the grand jury to lock in their testimony. That way, we have a full appreciation of the universe of their testimony, and importantly, it's under oath. So if you move to the trial stage and that same witness testifies, and for example, their memory has faded, or for whatever reason, their recollection of their testimony is not strong, or they spin us, that's a term of art, when a witness intentionally lies at trial, you can use that grand jury transcript, that sworn testimony, to confront the witness, to impeach the witness, and then you can use whatever the witness said in the grand jury, you can hand it to the trial jury to prove your case. So I was a little surprised that, they're just now getting around to talking with Stormy Daniels. We don't even know if she's been in the grand jury, but I will give them credit for sort of doing things tactically the way they think they ought to be done. So I assume there's a reason that they kind of waited until this late in the game to deal with Stormy Daniels.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you the question that I assume everyone has been asking you, and that is that, we have these two cases racing toward indictment concurrently. What do you think we're going to see indictment from first? Do you think we're going to see it from Fulton County, Georgia, or do you think we're going to see it from Manhattan DA case?
Yeah, impossible to predict. They are both
thought I could get you on that one.
they're both very close, I think, to being indicted. If I had to bet a buck of my own money, that's my betting limit. I would probably bet a buck on New York being first and Georgia being second, if only because Georgia is probably going to involve multiple defendants being indicted as part of a conspiracy. That is my strong suspicion at this point, given everything we've learned. And here is what the prosecutor might want to do before dropping that final indictment in Georgia. Fani Willis might want to have her team step to some of these defendants who are about to be indicted and say, look, you've got one last opportunity to avoid being named as a defendant in this conspiracy indictment. And it's if you decide to take responsibility for what you did, maybe we'll give you a reduced charge to plead guilty to, but you will have to truthfully cooperate and testify against any co-defendants about whom you might have incriminating information. So there might be some of that negotiating that still needs to go on before Fani Willis finally drops the indictment. So that's why I think I'm going to stick with New York being the first one out of the blocks to indict Donald Trump.
Well, what's so interesting about that, I find, is that, we out here all just assume that Fani Willis coming forward and saying that an indictment is imminent is for our benefit. But in fact, she could be using that for her own benefit by really using that line to ramp the pressure up on all of these co-conspirators and basically to let them know now is the time to shit or get off the pot. Like it's now or never. An indictment is imminent. So either you're with us or you're against us. And so we're all like perhaps naively out here expecting like an imminent indictment and assuming that Fani Willis is talking to us as if we need like any reassurance from the district attorney in Fulton County. She may have very well done that just to kind of use it to her own benefit and really put the pressure on these people to either help her or suffer the consequences themselves.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because prosecutors don't typically make any sorts of public statements for the benefit of the public. You're exactly right. We do it for whatever tactical advantage we think, it might have for purposes of our case, where we are and how we're trying to move forward. I will say, once we heard her charging decision was imminent, I think we were all expecting, okay, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think that statement is now, 5 or 6 weeks in our rear view mirror. So I suspect she's involved in some negotiations right now.
All right. Well, with that said, for anybody watching, if you want to keep on top of both of these cases in Fulton County, Georgia, and in Manhattan, make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.